National Youth Council co-organized the peer learning activity, PLA, a rights-based approach to youth policies in a hybrid format on the 22nd and 23rd of June 2021 at IPDJ, Lisbon Youth Centre, Portugal. The peer learning activity aims to bring together member states, young people, researchers, and key players in the field of youth for an exchange of views on rethinking youth and youth policies aligned with a rights-based approach. A rights-based approach to youth policies is one of the main priorities of the Portuguese Presidency of the Council of the European Union in the field of youth, in line with the EU Youth Strategy 2019-2027. In this framework, the Portuguese Institute of Sport and Youth and the European Commission, in cooperation with the European Youth Forum and the Portuguese National Youth Council, co-organized the peer learning activity, PLA, a rights-based approach to youth policies in a hybrid format on the 22nd and 23rd of June 2021 at IPDJ, Lisbon Youth Centre, Portugal. The peer learning activity aims to bring together member states, young people, researchers, and key players in the field of youth for an exchange of views on rethinking youth and youth policies aligned with a rights-based approach.
Hello, welcome back. Thank you very much for taking part in the breakout sessions. Hope you had fun and you had the moment to share your ideas, to share your knowledge with your peers, had the opportunity to know as well about other practices that are happening in other member states, in other organizations, and hopefully you also had a good learning moment from this. What I'm gonna now, for this last bit of day one, before lunchtime, we just want to have a quick presentation of the recommendations from the breakout sessions. So without further ado, for my group, which I was moderating, I would like to have Natasha to take the floor to present the results of the session. Please, if you can give her the mic. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope you can all hear me. My name is Natasha, and I was fortunate enough to be in the breakout group discussing how do we encourage mutually accountable partnerships between young people and duty bearers to ensure access to rights. And we had two main questions that we discussed. The first question was, how is transparency and accountability recognized and promoted in youth policy framework in your respective country and in Europe? And to say from the beginning, we had a very good discussion overall, many different inputs. And to highlight and to summarize, we had some quite good examples from Portugal, from Germany, Romania, Belgium, in terms of, frameworks, national youth ministries, national youth law, national youth policies, and having those sort of kind of structures in place. However, the discussion also went quite quickly into, well, what is still missing? What are the challenges that we're facing? And one of the points that all of us agreed on was that, well, the major problem is that we still look at youth policy as a box, this kind of silo. Also comes back to the rights-based approach, that we don't really think it across the sectors, across the themes, and when you do it like that, then you don't really have anyone responsible for youth in general, and that becomes an issue. And that's on national level, but it's also on European level that we see this silo thinking and box thinking of youth, which is quite a challenge. And then when you have this lack of communication and cooperation across sectors, across pillars, across political structures, well, then there's a big gap in terms of trying to push youth, but also youth policy and youth rights. So what we really also came to was that we need to push intersectionality in youth policy and integration of youth policy on different levels and different structures. And to highlight also something positive, 3 good examples that we also discussed, the Youth Progress Index from the European Youth Forum. I think the new one was just presented last week or 2 weeks ago. Having that sort of, indicators, measurements, and data supporting, what's happening in the youth field, what's happening in terms of countries and their implementation of youth policy. There's also an example from Germany, this youth check of legislation. I think it's still in theory and not happening in practice yet, but this approach that all legislation has to go through this youth check to see what are the impact or what's the impact of young people if this legislation turns into practice. And then also a practical example from Portugal, kind of like an opening door policy that even though, the policy topic might not be specifically on youth, engage in it, like this, again, intersectionality approach, and bring forward youth perspectives to ensure that young people are actually also included in that sort of discussion. And lastly, we had the second question, what gaps and challenges can be identified regarding implementation of the rights-based principle in our countries and in Europe. And, gaps are always easy to highlight and always easy to find. And we have quite a few of them. The ones are the more traditional, lack of funding, lack of time, lack of resources, lack of quality frameworks in terms of youth policy, and especially rights-based approach. We also discussed the lack of data, disaggregated data in terms of age, gender. We need quality data to kind of also support our policy. Then we talked about this responsibility structure, both in terms of mainstreaming. If you choose the mainstreaming approach of youth, then you have a lot of people responsible for doing youth, but then in practice, is anyone really responsible? And vice versa, if only one ministry or only one person is responsible for youth, then is anyone responsible? So it has to be that sort of balance. And that goes also in terms of accountability. Member states are accountable, but who's holding them accountable when it comes to actions and implementation? And I mean, we have quite a few points, but also skills of the people in ministries. I mean, we're not going against anyone in public administration at all, because they're really, really good. But in terms of experience in the youth field, do they actually understand, and do they have experience with the youth field, youth organization on both national, European, and global level? Because it's a very dynamic field that changes and develops over time as well. And then maybe the last point I would like to highlight is that what do we do when advocacy fails? And an example that was brought forward was strategic litigation. We've seen it from Belgium in terms of unpaid partnerships, internships, not partnerships, internships, but also we've seen a case from Germany where young people took the government to court in terms of climate justice. So that's also, an approach we discussed, pros and cons, use the existing structures, use legislation to actually hold your member state or your government accountable. On the other side, it takes time, it takes resources. And do we have that sort of time when we're talking about actually youth policy and implementation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natasha.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Natasha, for that very good summary of the session. So, Jana, please, for your own.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. I mean, I have plenty of ideas in my mind listening to you, but let's give the floor to the group number 1. Guys, if you like to kind of share highlights from our discussion, they were quite similar, I would say. There are many similarities. So I think we are going to be able to provide this synergy also among us, right? To come up with some joint conclusions, please.
Yeah, we talked about participation, we talked about inclusion. And from us, it was really interesting to hear what Natasha was wrapping up about their workshop, because our workshop had really, really similar topics. And yeah, in my point of view, it makes really sense, because our main highlight was, or our main result was, that all policy is youth policy. So no matter about what topic we are talking, we always have to talk how is it affecting young people, and how can we ensure that young people can be stakeholders, can be also decision makers in those processes. And for us, it was really, really important to make sure that it's not enough to just ask them for their opinion, to just use them as tokens, but really to give them the chance to make their impact, to really be part of the decision-making bodies. So that was something what was really important for us. But I guess it's also really logical, because when we talk about the point that all policy is youth policy and that everything is connected with each other, it makes also sense that our 3 workshops are pretty much connected, and there's also like a lot of synergy. So yeah, I guess all in all, there were a lot of similarities. And moreover, we talked about things that we have to keep in mind. Like, for example, that when we demand young people to be heard, to be the ones that who make like the decisions, that we have to be like a good role model in our youth council, in all our youth organizations and our own platforms, so that also we are open for everyone, and that we really try actively to ask people about their opinions and to include them in our decision-making processes. So if we want other institutions or international organizations to be really holistic and to ask everyone for their opinion and to include them, we have to make the first step and be a good role model of that. Because if we as youth organizations and youth councils are not really inclusive, and we don't want everyone to participate on the same level, then we can't really demand it from someone else. So I guess that was another conclusion, that we really have to see how we are acting on ourselves and how we can improve ourselves.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to add another thing that we talked at the beginning that I think is meaningful to say, we discuss a lot about communication and how to increase participation and how we can do that. And it's easy to believe that we just have to get something new. But one of our main conclusions is that everything works and we need every channel of communication to be involved in. So we need new social media, we need new platforms, but we need the old ones too. We need to make sure that youth councils are communicating everything to youth organization. We need to make sure that youth organizations are communicating with their city majors, that every youth population is part of the conversation. If that is not happening, then change is not possible at all.
Yeah, just to add to what my colleague said in the group was participation and the inclusion, and the conversation kept going into the inclusion side of the discussion. And I think that goes in line with what they already said, that what is really important is to reach out and to reach out to all young people, not just the ones that are involved in youth organizations and youth centers. And in that sense, also promoting that they are taking part in guaranteeing that their own rights are achieved, basically.
Thank you all.
No, thank you very much for presenting again the cases of the. There's one more contribution. My apologies. Yes. No. Okay. No. Thank you very much all for presenting the results of the breakout session. I want to move to the last one, which by Pete. So please go ahead to share the conclusions of your group. And we need a mic on the right side of the room. Thank you.
So I haven't spoken a lot today, so I will try to keep it short. So our main focus was on equality and non-discrimination. So the previous parts really linked to this point. In the first question, when it's about recognition and promotion of topics of equality and non-discrimination, we do acknowledge the strategies and plans addressing these topics. Nevertheless, we do see that there is lack of understanding the need to have these strategies and plans. and to follow up on actions. And some examples that they were mentioned is, for example, Bulgaria not ratifying the Istanbul Convention while claiming in their strategies and their plans supporting women empowerment and protection from domestic violence, or the case of Turkey stepping out of Istanbul Convention. And then there's also the part where we see that in a planner strategy with the equality strategy of the EU, etc., when the resilient funds came forward, the engagement of youth and minority or groups in the risk of discrimination and exclusion were not being engaged, with a positive example of Portugal being engaging towards National Youth Council in developing their plan. And passing through this, I go to the part of the gaps and challenges, which was the second question. And as it was mentioned about the youth policy, in the youth conference of Germany, we said a youthless policy is a useless policy. And I would say that very much so, a policy that lacks diversity and equality within its core, again, will lead to failure. And one of the parts that really, really reflects on the outcome of to have an implementation that reaches to a concrete result is the realization that when we develop a policy that is not engaging and is not made by and for the people who face daily discrimination, either before COVID and much more so during the pandemic, will not lead to change. And I was very happy within this group that we do acknowledge problems like challenges to engage with main stakeholders, challenges to really follow up and have the channels or be aware of the channels that you could engage as a young person, a person that face inequality and discrimination. We talked about the LGBT community, LGBTQI plus community. We talk about women, the difficulties about knowing what your rights are, having access to your rights, and being able to enjoy those rights equally as others, no matter if you live in an urban area or in a rural area. We've paid focus on the demographics due to this part, but also the socioeconomical parts of it. Like, we as young people are facing parts of even thinking about buying a house, which if it was an option before the pandemic, now it has much more further in our age standards rather than, let's say, by our 30s. Another important factor was media. We acknowledge the importance and significance of the media. Nevertheless, what we see within the European Union and member states is that there is lack of education and engagement with media representatives. Media freedom is a right and an obligation we have. Educating media representatives or people who engage with politicians and media is vital, because understanding what gender is, understanding what is the content of the Istanbul Convention, even people who work for the Istanbul Convention have difficulties explaining in the national context. Imagine media that they have a title and they need to interpret that title for the audience. It's not that easy. Therefore, we need to pay attention on how we do this if we really want those strategies and action plans to reflect a reality and to address a reality. And last, not to take it too far, as I said before, it's really important to understand the right-based approach and the developments that can bring a positive change. It's important to acknowledge the compromise and how important is compromise within the whole process. And we acknowledge that there is lack of compromise, especially during the pandemic, in achieving solutions. And one of these topics, for example, is how people are treated based on their religious beliefs, and examples of discrimination in employment or discrimination to express their religion. And there are two levels. It's different for a government to set a non-religious based mentality, and it's different for a citizen to be free in enjoying their religious beliefs that don't affect other communities. And with that, I will close. I think there are many topics, and the most key core part is engaging, is listening, and is compromising to lead to change. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you all, guys.
Thank you very much, Pete. Thank you very much, Pete, for again sharing the conclusions of your breakout sessions. And now I give the very difficult task of giving a very quick summary of the discussions to my colleague Sajana on main takeaways from what was shared, and what can we bring to the discussions to day 2, so that will start tomorrow. So please, Sajana, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Piece of cake. First of all, thank you all for your contributions. My impression is that we are really reaching the critical mass, which is going to produce, the vehicle of change. This is kind of really perfect momentum for all of us to really make a change, but not just because, we are saying this, but I would like to remind you that there are quite serious and quite massive political changes going on also in the youth sector, and the challenges mentioned by you are already kind of starting to be addressed at the political level. For example, what we learned, and I'm really super happy to hear this, is that finally it is the time for all of us to understand how complex youth policy is, how complex young people's lives are. Nowadays, more than ever, the policymakers also need to come up with complex responses, complex measures, and also with measures that are not only responsive, but also that are preventive. I would say that the good news is that this European social pillar and other tools are already there. So we have something to rely on. All these things are mentioned in your background paper. So if you like, you could check the links, and we are going to mention them throughout the event. But the good news is that there are already, I would say, very serious political steps taken to address our kind of challenges that we have identified, and there are indeed many. The focus on youth inclusion versus, let's say, political participation is quite interesting, I would say, at this point, which is not surprising, having in mind the crisis and the depth of impact that the COVID had on young people's lives. But I would say the good news is also that, for example, the institution of the EU Youth Coordinator is finally there at the European level for the first time. So one of the key missions of the EU Youth Coordinator, which is, by the way, one of the instruments for implementation of the youth strategy, right? One of the main missions is to provide this cross-sectoral cooperation, is to come up with models in which youth issues will be finally, I would say for the first time, tackled in this horizontal and vertical, very integrated and very complex manner, I would say. So maybe this is really the good momentum for all of us, and our inputs could really feed this process. I would say that they could be really useful also for the EU Youth Coordinator, like personally, if you like. I mean, you know that it is only recently that this institution has been established, and I would say that we have a lot to offer. My ambition is not obviously to summarize and repeat even everything that has been mentioned during the sessions. We are indeed going to prepare the material and summaries for the discussion groups for you tomorrow in order to kind of follow up on these summaries and to come up with concrete recommendations. But I would say that for today, maybe we should keep our minds open, and this understanding of youth policy as really a very wide and complex sector that could be also very kind of fluid and creative and intersectional, interconnected, is something that we could really celebrate, I would say. And I also invite us to be brave and not to be shy when it comes to recommendations, because we have a lot to say, we have a lot to offer, and as I said, the momentum is perfect. So I would also like to thank once again to the Portuguese Presidency for providing the space for this discussion, which is super relevant, super important and super timely. That's even important from the policy perspective, right? So thank you all, really.
Thank you all indeed. And that's the closing of day one discussions. So tomorrow we will go a bit broader. We're going to have presentations that will tackle examples from Portugal, examples from the Council of Europe, but also in terms of best practices in implementation of an RBA in their context, but also from other regions in the world. We're going to have the presentation from the CPLP, but also from the OIJ, so we can learn from other regions what RBA is for them, how it's being implemented in their countries, and how this is what lessons can we extract from these sharing. And as Sajana said, we will take on board all that was already discussed on day one, together with these recommendations from these best practices from these experts who talk tomorrow. And we're going to again take all this knowledge and go back into discussion groups and come up with specific recommendations to be shared as an outcome of this peer learning activity. So this is for tomorrow. So for the meantime, many thanks. Thank you very much for coming here, even in Lisbon, but also virtually, taking part of the discussions, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your ideas and your experiences. All of this is extremely valuable for us and for everybody who's here. And hope to see you all tomorrow, starting at 9:15 Portuguese time. So until then, many thanks. Have a great afternoon and see you tomorrow.
A rights-based approach to youth policies is one of the main priorities of the Portuguese Presidency of the Council of the European Union in the field of youth, in line with the EU Youth Strategy 2019-2027. In this framework, the Portuguese Institute of Sport and Youth and the European Commission, in cooperation with the European Youth Forum and the Portuguese National Youth Council, co-organized the peer learning activity, PLA, a rights-based approach to youth policies, in a hybrid format on the 22nd and 23rd of June 2021 at IPDJ, Lisbon Youth Centre, Portugal. The peer learning activity aims to bring together member states, young people, researchers, and key players in the field of youth for an exchange of views on rethinking youth and youth policies aligned with a rights-based approach.